What on earth is wrong with the Australian Labor Party? Since 2014, there have been so-called security notice provisions that allow the minister to cancel payments for people who've had visas or passports cancelled on security grounds. Essentially, terrorism-related cases involving ASIO. Now, those provisions were controversial enough at the time, but this bill massively expands that power. Now the minister can cancel payments for anyone with an outstanding arrest warrant for serious offences. Power over welfare payments. And I say again, Labor snuck it into the bill after it had gone through committee scrutiny. It's a shameful tactic from Labor to do this, because a warrant is not a conviction. It's not even a charge. Yet this bill strips people of critical supports before they've had their day
Senator
in court.
Shoebridge. Senator Roberts, are you saying?
And again I hear Labor senators interjecting and saying that's not true.
Order.
Say it to the Council of Single Mothers. Say that it's not true to Anglicare Australia. Say it's not true to ACOS. Say it's not true to the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Services, who are telling Labor that this is unfair. They're telling Labor that just like so many attacks on welfare, it's going to come and hit the most vulnerable.
All right, picture this. The Senate chamber, all polished wood and serious faces, and then bang, along comes Senator Shoebridge like someone's just knocked over a flat white in slow motion, and he's not letting it slide. G'day and welcome, folks, to another episode of Australian Politics, where everyone insists they're the adult in the room while simultaneously tripping over the same rake they swore they'd put away last time. Grab a cuppa, settle in, because this one's a beauty. Real quick before we roll the footage, if you're enjoying this content, do me a huge favour, hit that like button and smash subscribe. Over 98% of viewers watch without subscribing. Don't be one of them. It's free for you and it helps us out more than you know. Already clicked? You're awesome. Let's get into the video.
And I say to those in the government benches who are now interjecting here, trying to sort of suggest that there's some decency or fairness in this, maybe listen to what the stakeholders... Before you interject, through you, Deputy President, before those members on the Labor benches interject angrily to try and support this, maybe listen to what some of the stakeholders have said about this before you jump in to defend yet another attack on the most vulnerable from Labor. This isn't a minor technical amendment. It's a fundamental expansion of ministerial power over welfare payments. And I say again, Labor snuck it into the bill after it had gone through committee scrutiny. It's a shameful tactic from Labor to do this, because a warrant is not a conviction. It's not even a charge. Yet this bill strips people of critical supports before they've had their day in
Senator
court.
Shoebridge. Senator Roberts, are you seeking a point of order? Oh, okay. Senator Shoebridge, please continue.
It's the senator's loftiness getting in the way again. A warrant is not a conviction. It's not even a charge. Yet this bill strips people of critical supports before they've had their day in court. And if they even have one, since we know, of course, many charges fall away well before that stage. On the 29th of October, 18 different organisations issued a joint statement calling on the government to abandon this amendment. I repeat that, 18 organisations issued a joint statement. And we have Labor senators in this chamber barracking for these amendments, barracking for this attack on some of the most vulnerable people in the community. And before they jump up and do that, maybe listen to what Anglicare Australia have said, to what the Australian Council of Social Services have said, the Australian Unemployed Workers Union have said, the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Services have said, the Council of Single Mothers and Their Children, and many others have said. They've raised serious critical concerns, including the impact of victims of family violence, and where abusers could use this as an additional tool to harm their victims by reporting them to police to trigger a warrant. And suddenly the victim loses their income, their home, their ability to care for their children on a decision made not by a court, but a decision made by an AFP police officer without any understanding of the family dynamics, a decision made by an ASIO officer who has no understanding of the family dynamics, not tested in court, often not even the person charged probably wouldn't even be able to afford a lawyer. The Council of Single Mothers warned that this could see, and I quote, too many single mothers and their children, many of them Aboriginal, misrepresented as perpetrators of violence and then effectively stripped of their payments. And again I hear Labor senators interjecting and saying that's not true. Say it to the Council of Single Mothers. Say that it's not true to Anglicare Australia. Say it's not true to ACOS. Say it's not true to the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Services, who are telling Labor that this is unfair. They're telling Labor that just like so many attacks on welfare, it's going to come and hit the most vulnerable. Now, the Robo-debt Royal Commission recommended Services Australia design its policies and processes with a primary emphasis on the recipients it's meant to serve, including avoiding language and conduct which reinforces the feelings of stigma and shame. This bill does the opposite. It treats people as guilty and it targets the most vulnerable. This measure also breaks the fundamental principle that welfare should be based on need and clear criteria, not on ministerial discretion or politics. This measure concentrates power in the minister's hands with no administrative review, or if there is review, it's legal review before the courts, which we know judicial review is not available to people on welfare, and even less available to people who've had their welfare taken off them by the decision of a Labor minister. And we know from overseas exactly who these policies hurt. In New Zealand, similar provisions saw 71% of sanctions applied to Maori people, despite being only 36% of benefit recipients. Their welfare expert advisory group has recommended removing this sanction because of its attacks on New Zealand's First Peoples. In the United States, fugitive felon provisions disproportionately affect elderly and vulnerable people, often unaware of warrants being issued against them. This part of the bill, Deputy President, is deeply unconscionable. It should never have found its way into this bill without review. It's a betrayal of commitments Labor has given. It's an attack on the most vulnerable, and it should not pass.
Shoebridge stands up, all calm and courteous, giving polite nods to colleagues, the sort of opening that makes you think, oh yeah, this'll be civil. And then, without raising his voice, he drops the line that changes the temperature in the room. Cancelling welfare payments for people with outstanding arrest warrants isn't justice, it's punishment without trial. You can almost hear the collective intake of breath from the government benches, like someone's just said the quiet bit out loud. Because here's the trick, outstanding warrant doesn't mean guilty, it doesn't even mean charged. It means a bit of paper exists somewhere saying, oi, we'd like a word. And suddenly, under this plan, that's enough to switch off someone's income like a dodgy power meter. Now Shoebridge, bless him, doesn't need to shout. He just casually reminds everyone we've been here before. Robo-debt. That little episode Australia promised itself it would never repeat, like that haircut you had in the early 2000s. The Royal Commission didn't exactly give Robo-debt a glowing Yelp review. Crude, cruel, unlawful. Made people feel like criminals just for being on welfare. And here we are again. Different packaging, same vibe. New label, same old bottle. Shoebridge basically says, you've changed the font, not the philosophy. Cue Penny Wong in the invisible presence of Anthony Albanese, who, as Shoebridge politely notes, isn't even in the room because this is the Senate, and Albo only drops by the lower house for question time, like a guest appearance on a long-running soap. And that absence becomes part of the comedy. It's like arguing with someone's voicemail while their colleagues insist they're definitely listening somewhere. Shoebridge keeps going, pointing out that these amendments were slipped into the bill after all the usual checks had finished. Committees? Done. Human rights scrutiny? Finished. Parliamentary oversight? Nah, she'll be right. It's the legislative equivalent of adding anchovies to a pizza after everyone's already agreed on the topics. And when he reminds Labor that back in 2018 they thought this idea was unprincipled and wrong, there's that delicious pause where the irony hangs in the air like humidity before a storm. Same policy, different seats. Funny how principles sometimes need a GPS when you cross the aisle into government. And then comes the expansion of power. What used to be a narrow national security-related thing is suddenly a broad criminal law tool, from terrorism cases to anyone with a serious offence warrant. That's not a tweak, that's a glow-up nobody asked for. Thousands of people potentially affected, families relying on payments to keep the lights on, all at the mercy of a decision that hasn't seen the inside of a courtroom. Shoebridge keeps repeating it, not for drama, but because repetition is how you get through when people pretend not to hear. A warrant is not a conviction.
At this point, there's interjecting. You can imagine the eye rolls, the muttered comments. Shoebridge, unfazed, suggests, politely of course, that maybe the government benches could listen to the stakeholders before leaping to the defence of yet another policy that somehow always lands hardest on the people with the least cushioning. He He starts listing names like he's reading the guest list of an extremely serious party: Anglicare Australia, ACOS, the Australian Unemployed Workers Union, National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Legal Services, the Council of Single Mothers and their Children, 18 organisations, all waving red flags, all saying this is a bad idea. And here's where the parody almost writes itself, because Shoebridge doesn't exaggerate. He just repeats what these groups are worried about: victims of family violence, potentially losing their income because an abuser triggers a warrant, decisions made by police or security officers who don't know the family dynamics, aren't testing evidence in court, and aren't the ones who have to explain to a parent why the rent didn't get paid this week. It's not a cartoon villain twirling a mustache. It's bureaucracy doing what bureaucracy does best when it forgets there are actual humans attached. The Council of Single Mothers warns that too many women and kids, many Aboriginal, could be misrepresented and stripped of payments. Shoebridge says Labor senators are barracking against that claim, and you can almost hear him shrugging through the microphone. Don't argue with me, he seems to say. Argue with the people on the ground. There's a rhythm to it now. Statement, evidence, reminder. No insults, no fireworks, just a steady drumbeat of "this hurts vulnerable people." Then he circles back to Robo-debt, because of course he does. The Royal Commission recommended designing welfare systems with empathy, avoiding stigma and shame. This policy, he argues, does the exact opposite. It treats people as guilty first and asks questions later, if at all. Welfare, which should be about need and clear criteria, becomes a matter of ministerial discretion. Power concentrated at the top, review options practically out of reach for the very people who'd need them. Judicial review sounds lovely on paper, but try accessing that when you've just lost your payment. Shoebridge even drags in overseas examples, because nothing spices up a Senate speech like comparative policy analysis. New Zealand tried similar sanctions, and surprise, surprise, Maori communities copped the worst of it. The experts over there now recommend scrapping the whole thing. In the United States, fugitive felon rules hit elderly and vulnerable people who often didn't even know a warrant existed. History's sending postcards saying, "Don't do this," and Labor's apparently marked them return to sender. By the end, Shoebridge isn't shouting. He doesn't need to. He just calls the measure unconscionable, a betrayal of commitments, an attack on the most vulnerable. And the parody here isn't in making him sound outrageous, it's in the quiet absurdity of watching a government swear it learned its lesson, then confidently walking back into the same wall, only this time insisting the wall has changed. So there you have it. No heroes, no villains, just a Senate chamber, a policy that smells suspiciously familiar, and a speech that politely but firmly says, "We've seen this movie, and it doesn't end well." And somewhere, hovering over it all like a ghost at a barbecue, the memory of Robo-debt whispering, "You sure about this, mate?"